I, 43, female, recently got married to my husband, 45, male, who happens to be the son of a colleague of my dad. I've been married once before and even have a daughter from my previous marriage. She's 19 years old. My first husband ended up cheating on me when my daughter was just 2 months old, so obviously I filed for divorce, and since he didn't really care what became of us, he let us go. Since then, I've been raising my daughter on my own, and I'm actually proud of how far I've come. I wish I could say the same thing about my father, though. My dad, 65, male, is a conservative sort of man and doesn't believe in the idea of divorce, so he was really upset with me when I chose to divorce my first husband instead of sticking it out with him. He didn't speak to me for a month or so when it happened, but I begged and pleaded for him to forgive me back then because he's the only family I have and I just couldn't stand the thought of being all alone. He forgave me eventually for disappointing him and even let me stay with him until I had enough money to be back on my feet again. Since then, he's been an active part of my life. Around a year ago, my dad told me that he'd set up a date for me with a friend's son who was supposed to be this really nice and sweet guy who was also single, which was rare. I had no interest in dating again, but my dad asked me to do it as a favor to him, so I went on the date but didn't expect much. On the date, though, in spite of my reluctance to enter a romantic relationship ever again, I ended up hitting it off with the guy, and eventually we got really serious about each other. I told him about my past and my daughter on the first date itself, and he seemed to be all right with it as well. A few months later, he asked me to marry him, and even though it seemed way too early, I did say yes. I guess the fact that my daughter also seemed to get along with this man made me feel differently about marriage. But I should have just stuck to my initial decision to never get married again after my first divorce, since my husband was yet another mistake. A few weeks into our marriage, he started showing us his true colors. It was as if I'd married a stranger or something. He was drastically different from the man that we were used to. He'd become this angry, mean person who I couldn't even talk to without every conversation inevitably ending in a huge fight. On top of that, he'd constantly compare me with his mother, and it became clear that whatever I do, I'll just never be as good as her. Worse still was the way he treated my daughter. He would snap at her at every little thing and call her unwanted. He would even taunt her about how she was the reason her actual dad left me, which was just so awful. I wanted to leave, but the only thing that held me back was the fear of my father. He had absolutely no idea about what kind of person my husband was, and I was way too scared to tell him, since even the implication of a divorce would set him off and he'd just never forgive me again. My dad might be a lot of things, but he's also the only living parent I have, and the thought of him cutting me out of his life really did scare me, which is why I put up with my husband's behavior for so long. But then, a week ago, my daughter just left without even a goodbye. She was just gone one morning, and I noticed that some of her stuff was missing too. I called and texted her several times while I panicked, and my husband, as usual, didn't give a damn. Eventually, around the evening, she texted back saying that she was living with a friend of hers and didn't want to come back until I divorced my husband. It was his cruelty that had driven her away, and when I told him that, he didn't even seem sorry in the least about it and laughed in my face, then went on to say that he was glad the little brat was gone now. I couldn't believe the nerve of this man and felt like calling up my lawyer right then, but hesitated, once again thinking about my father and how angry he would be. For the next few days, I was in a dilemma about what to do and cried myself to sleep on the couch every night since I didn't want to sleep in the same room as my husband anymore. He didn't care about it either, and life went on for him, even though we weren't on speaking terms. He just didn't care. Then, around 2 days ago, while I was having a bit of a lie-in on the couch, I overheard my husband speaking to someone on his phone. I guessed that it must have been his mother because he was talking about how I'm being annoying again, but he's fine when it's as long as I'm not speaking to him. Then he started telling her about how there was still no word from my daughter, followed by laughter. He then said that he wanted to celebrate her being gone with a party, and that was followed by some more laughter. He even started planning it with his mother, and both of them were clearly relishing the whole idea of it. Needless to say, I was furious. I guess he didn't realize that I wasn't asleep, but then I highly doubt that it would have made a difference. Maybe he would have said things even more hurtful than that had he known that I was awake. I kept lying on the couch and was fuming the entire morning while he went about his day without a care in the world, and that pissed me off even more, and I felt like I just had to do something to put this man in his place. By the end of the day, I'd come up with a plan to get back at this horrible man and make sure that he didn't take me as lightly as he was. If a party was what he wanted, then a party was what he would get. Last evening, I threw him a party that he so desperately wanted. I invited all his coworkers and his boss. I told them that it was a surprise party for him since we were going to celebrate the anniversary of our first date, so they stayed quiet about it. I also invited his mother and a few of our mutual friends. My husband returned from the gym at around 6 in the evening, and by then most of our guests had arrived, so we were able to pull the surprise off. He looked really lost while everyone congratulated him, and I knew that I had to get this done quickly before he was able to figure out that something was off. So I went to the kitchen and brought out the box, which was supposed to have cake in it, but that's where the true surprise was. Once I'd handed the box over to him, the idiot remarked about how it was lighter than he'd thought it would be, and then opened it up to check out the contents of the box. To everyone's surprise, there was nothing in it apart from some documents. My husband brought it out, still looking confused, but within seconds, his expression changed from confusion to utter shock. Yeah, those were divorce papers. His expression was all that I'd wanted to see, and now that I'd seen it, I knew that it was time to leave. I told him that we were done, in front of all the guests who looked as confused as him, then left. I'd already had a bag packed, so I grabbed it from the other room and walked out while he still stood in his place, frozen there with a horrible look on his dumb face. I drove down to a nearby hotel where I planned to live for the next few days until I was able to find a proper apartment for myself and my daughter. We'd been in touch, but she'd refused to come back unless I got rid of my husband. At least she'd been kind enough to still talk to me, in spite of whatever I'd inadvertently put her through. She understood why I was so reluctant to divorce my husband and respected the fact that I was afraid of losing my dad, but she also couldn't just let this man walk all over her and treat her like crap, which was fair. She really was far braver than me, and in a way, she's the one who gave me the courage to do what I did and leave this sham of a marriage. Anyway, that was yesterday, and up until today, I didn't receive any calls or texts from anyone, probably because they were too frazzled while dealing with their guests. This morning, I received a bunch of texts from my mother-in-law where she went on to accuse me of ruining her son's life on purpose, even though he tried his best to be a good husband to me, but I clearly didn't deserve it. She even told me that she'll make sure my dad gets to know about what I did, as if I was some schoolgirl in trouble. Most of all, she was incredibly pissed off that I had invited my husband's boss and co-workers as well to humiliate him even more, and told me that I could have just served him with the divorce papers normally if I wanted to leave so badly, and had absolutely no need to pull off such an unnecessary stunt for attention. I don't particularly feel sorry about anything that I did, but I might be wrong. AITA for humiliating my husband in front of his boss and coworkers? Update 1. So it's been around 3 days since I left my toxic husband, and my life and mental health has improved considerably since then. My daughter finally agreed to come visit me in the hotel, and it was a teary and emotional reunion, to say the least. I was overjoyed to see her after what felt like an eternity, and I guess she felt the same. I told her what I'd done, and we even had a good laugh about it, and it truly made it all worth it. While things are better with my daughter now, it's equally bad with my soon-to-be ex-husband and my father. As soon as my dad found out about the impending divorce, he called me up and shouted himself hoarse. Pissed would be an understatement. He was actually livid. Even after I explained the situation to him and told him about how cruelly my husband had been treating us, he didn't seem to care and even told me that no matter what, I should have stayed with him and tried to make things work instead of leaving. He told me that he would have preferred that I stayed married and suffer rather than get a divorce, which was just so hurtful. I didn't have anything to say to him after that, so I finally stood up to him and informed him that my decision to end this marriage was final, and nothing that he said or did was going to change my mind. He still tried to argue with me so he could intimidate me into doing what he wanted, but I knew that I had to put myself and my daughter first now. So I hung up and didn't accept any of his calls after that. My husband, on the other hand, has been downright intolerable and has been texting me every single day to beg me to cancel the divorce proceedings. I don't even know why he's so desperate to be with me, since he definitely didn't act like it while we were married. His mother has stopped texting me, though. I can tell that there's something really fishy going on here, but I'm not particularly interested in finding out because whatever it is, I don't think it's going to help me. Update 2. Okay, so my daughter is in college, so she hasn't been able to visit, but a few hours ago, she told me that my husband had been lurking near her campus. She knew because one of her friends recognized him from a family photo that she'd posted on our wedding day. Thankfully, she'd skipped her classes that day since she was sick and was resting in her apartment. I was really alarmed to hear this because if my husband is looking for my daughter, it definitely isn't for something good. He doesn't know where my daughter's apartment is or which hotel I'm living in, but I don't think it'll be hard for him to trace me down at least. I don't understand what he wants from us now because, as far as I'm concerned, we're done and there's just no way in hell that I'm going back to him no matter what he says. I told my daughter to stay home for a few days and ensure that she doesn't go out by herself until this whole mess with my husband is sorted out. I don't know how to go about any of this right now since I have absolutely no one on my side. My dad has stopped speaking to me since I told him that I would be going through with the divorce no matter what he says, and my daughter is obviously too young. I guess I'll just have to speak to my husband so that he doesn't bother my daughter at least, and truth be told, I'd rather put myself in harm's way than her, like any other mother would. I'm just grateful that I have the luxury of working remotely right now, or else I would be at a total loss on how to pay off all the expenses. Anyway, I'm going to ask my husband to drop by tomorrow so that we can discuss whatever it is that he's so eager to talk about. Like I said, I highly doubt that he can change my mind, but if that guarantees that he's going to leave me and my daughter alone, then I'm ready to talk to him. I hope he doesn't contest the divorce. Update 3. Well, I met my husband today and it's been a little over a week since I filed for divorce. What he told me today literally blew my mind since I had absolutely no idea this was how low my dad could fall. I already didn't expect much from my husband, but my own father was a complete a-hole as well. My husband and I met at a coffee shop near my hotel since I didn't want him to know where I was staying. When I saw him, he looked really nervous, and it was obvious that this meeting was very important for him. I told him to make it quick, so he got straight to the point and told me that he couldn't let this divorce happen simply because of the deal that he'd made with my dad. Apparently, my dad had set me up with him and asked him to get married to me so that I'd have a husband and lead a respectable life. In exchange for that, my dad was willing to leave his entire inheritance to him, as long as he could make the marriage work. This explained why he'd been on his best behavior while we were in a relationship, but he'd started slacking off once we got married. His parents had no idea about this deal that he'd made, which explained why his mother had been anything less than warm with me. I still couldn't understand why he hadn't kept up the act even after we'd gotten married, and he admitted that he couldn't stand my daughter since she was a freeloader, and for the first year of their marriage, he'd have to pay for everything himself. After that, It'd all be taken care of by my dad, so he just had to make the arrangement work for 1 year. But he got greedy and wanted to drive my daughter away, so he treated us like crap, and eventually she left. What he hadn't counted on was the fact that maybe my daughter leaving would also lead to our divorce, since my father had told him that I'd never do that, just because of how scared I was of him. Well, too bad, Dad. I'm not that scared anymore. My husband wanted to convince me to stay with him, just for the sake of the deal, and even promised me that he'd split the inheritance with me once my dad passed away, but we could lead separate lives and nobody had to know. My dad's pretty rich, so that was saying something, but I have a decently cushy job as well, so I'm not particularly greedy about money, especially when I know for a fact that my dad was planning on giving it all away to his son-in-law as a bribe and not his actual daughter. I can't imagine anything worse than that, to be honest. My husband also let me in on the fact that my dad had never really forgiven me for abandoning my first marriage, which is why he wanted to ensure that I was kept in line by getting me married to the man he chose for me. I was disgusted by all of this and didn't even consider staying with my husband because, like I've said several times already, I don't care about him or my dad anymore. I want to put myself and my daughter first for a change. I told my husband that I'm not canceling any divorce proceedings and he'll just have to deal with losing the inheritance since it wasn't like he was entitled to it in the first place. He was pretty devastated and looked like he wanted to argue, but I made a run for it and left the coffee shop as soon as I could. I'm currently in my hotel room and I still can't bring myself to believe that my own father has been lying to me for quite a while now and even essentially tricked me into getting married to someone. And worse still, he convinced that guy to marry me for money, so I've just been lied to by all the men in my life so far, which is always such a beautiful revelation. I feel utterly alone right now, but I know I can't just give up and mope because my daughter's still counting on me. Honestly, she's the only reason that I'm still going because everything else seems so bleak right now. Update 4. My husband hasn't stopped bothering me since I last met him at the coffee shop and keeps texting me non-stop. But I'm not responding to any of his texts since I have nothing to discuss with him. Yesterday, I finally confronted my dad about what he'd done as well. It took a lot of courage, but I knew that I had to do it somehow. So I called him after ages, and as soon as he answered it, he demanded to know if I'd patched up with my husband yet or not. But I didn't bother replying to that and told him about the deal that my husband had informed me about, and he didn't even bother denying it. He told me straight up that whatever my husband had told me was true and even insisted it was the right thing to do given the circumstances. He said that he always had my best interests at heart and he knew that the decision to get me married, be it through deception or not, was the best one for me and my daughter. We got into a huge argument about it where I just snapped and told him that he was absolutely nobody to decide what was good for me and my daughter, especially when he had no idea what I'd been through. He's never even tried to understand what my ex-husband put me through, and the sad truth is that he'll always remain a male chauvinist misogynist. After giving him a piece of my mind and letting out all the things that I've been holding back for so long, I finally hung up and blocked my father. He was now free to cut me out of his life forever, and I couldn't give less of a damn about it. I'm better off without him. As for my husband, he still thinks he stands a chance and keeps texting me, but whatever. It doesn't bother me anymore, and I know that eventually I'll get the divorce done. Update 5. My husband somehow found out where I've been living. He probably visited all the hotels in the vicinity because that's how desperate he seemed. It's been 3 days since I last met him, and today he refused to leave until I met him again, so I agreed and let him visit me in my room. Apparently, my dad told him that their little deal was off now since he decided to cut me out of his life entirely, so now, because of our fallout, he wants nothing to do with him either. He begged me to make things right, but I told him that I wasn't going to change my mind and he'd better move on with his life and try to make an honest living instead of using his wife as a means to get rich. After a fair bit of arguing, he ended up collapsing on the floor in a big sobbing mess. And I honestly felt really bad for him because of how pathetic he seemed. But I still didn't change my mind. Eventually, I guess he caught on and realized I wasn't going to be moved, so he left, still crying, and told me one last time to reconsider my decisions because we could still make this work for the both of us. But yeah, obviously not going to happen. I'm done with all of them and I don't owe them anything. Update 6. It's been around a month since I left my husband and he's decided not to contest the divorce. Like I said, my dad's fallout with me also meant that he wanted nothing to do with his son-in-law either, so naturally my husband has no reason to want to stay with me anymore. I'm happy about it, truth be told. They've done nothing but lie to me and make me feel awful about myself, so they don't deserve to be a part of my life either. I've also managed to find an apartment for myself, and I've moved out of the hotel into this apartment with my daughter, since she's the only loved one I have at this point. My dad and I haven't spoken since that last phone call where I snapped at him, and well, it's for the best. I'm only going to focus on my work and raising my daughter now. I guess being a single mother is the best bet for me, and I'm okay with it. Men are just off the table for me now. Stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships.